Hey there, my friend. Welcome back to Sevenfold. If we're just meeting for the first time, my name is Tim Halverson. So good to see you. I know this isn't live, but we're going to be doing live streams at some point, have a two-way conversation, bring people onto this platform, this channel to be able to talk about all things architecture, design technology, and making the most of that in your day-to-day workflows. So today we're having another conversation starter, a mindful moment, so that we can just have a bite-sized idea, talk about it, and this is going to be one of those smaller short-form pieces of content that I would love for you to engage in the comments, because I may bring up some topics that, who knows, controversial, maybe they spark some inspiration. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I will be engaging with you down there. So I'd love for you to engage and find your peers and colleagues around the industry, and maybe, who knows, we'll bring you up on the show in the future. So today's conversation starter is all things data. Now, in the past, I did a conversation starter on what is design technology. That was just trying to lay the groundwork for that term. What is it? How are we referring to that now in the industry? How are we growing that? And the short answer was it's not just BIM anymore. It's sort of all things technology to, again, empower you in your design practice of architecture. So within that, there's all kinds of things we can talk about, but I want to lock in on data at a high level. Data is everywhere, right? We hear about big data. We hear about, our data being sold online. Oh no, data analytics. But I think the big thing that is beneficial with data is the insights that we get. So if we are really pursuing high performing buildings, if we're pursuing being the best stewards of people and planet, given all the things that are evolving with science and making and discovering, right? What's going on with our climate, how we as humans impact the world that we've been given. How can we be better stewards of that? So we're better using our materials. We're trying to recycle that and upcycle that. And so we need to know what our materials are composed of so we can make better decisions, right? So that ultimately I feel like is the crux of why data matters, is improving our decision making and making the things that are invisible to the naked eye visible, so that we can really deepen our understanding and make more informed decisions. All right. So data insights is really the goal. Now, data could be just what you need to print on your drawing set so that you can issue for permit and get that built. But it could also be business. You could tie it back to business intelligence and help your client or your owner own and operate the building for the long-term cycle of their project. So data can be used in a variety of different ways. Sometimes if it's the same data, it can be extrapolated in multiple different ways. But sometimes, there's a lot of data that we could put into our models that would actually add value. Now, I know the concern. One of the concerns is, I just want more data, but then do we need that data? Is it actually useful? Is it essential? Is it gonna help me on my project? I don't know. Looking at that camera. That's one of the key questions and conversation starters you need to be having with yourself, as well as with your clients, as well as with your team, because it's not selling data for data's sake. We already have too much information. We need to cut through the noise, cut through the junk, and get to things that are going to matter, the bits of information that build a bigger story, not for our own predetermined biases, things that we want to see it. We have to be honest with what the results are coming back. And so setting up an environment where we're getting honest feedback based off of what we're putting in, and that could challenge our assumptions, challenge what we've come to know to be true, or it may reinforce what we've known to be true for many years. And I think it's important to be open to change, and also our clients in the field of architecture are getting more and more expectant to have that type of insight. And so when they get it in other tools and other platforms, it's becoming more and more of a common language. So what does that mean in terms of architecture? Okay, I don't want to talk technology. That's not my field of expertise in terms of big tech, big data, all the social media going on. In general, I get it. Like there's profiling that's happening out there. People are trying to utilize the digital exhaust that people are giving off. They're tracking the footprint throughout the digital world, all that good stuff. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about architecture. So in simple terms, right, we're talking about the I in BIM, the information in building information modeling. And that's not exclusively Revit, although I'm most familiar with Revit as an authoring tool. But if we think about data sets, right, every single element in our models, let's just put on the 3D model hat for a second. You dive into your 3D modeling environment. You're going to create your new project. You start to sculpt and shape and start to discover your forms, and maybe you're just simply moving geometry around and really getting your hands, metaphorically speaking, on the design. And I think at some point you want to get some basic data out of it, like querying how much area, how much square footage you have, or you want to assign some data, like which layer it is on, so that you can be organized. But as you go more and more, you need to have more data that's required, like what is my occupancy type? What is my square footage is, and is it rentable or not? Can I assign, is it leasable or not? How does this connect back to my authority having jurisdiction and my local authority? Am I compliant with code and all of that good stuff? Can I build this? Is it constructible, or am I clashing? Am I overlapping with some elements there? And so underneath the surface of it all, it's all data. Now, some of that data is describing and showing three-dimensional elements that looks like real built things out there in the world. My point in saying all this is there's an untapped field of information that we could be leveraging to help make better insights for our projects, okay? And so this is where we get into, we don't have to necessarily accept what the tools are giving us. Like Revit is built a certain way, it has a certain level of buttons and features that we can click. But when you open up the back end, when you open up the API with things like Dynamo or Rhino inside, now you can see the model as an entire ecosystem of data and information. And you can start to say, okay, I want to build some automations. I want to say, hey, I want to streamline automating my sheets. And that's a task that I want to basically remove from my effort, because I want to reinvest that time into design exploration, research, design charrettes, the iterative process to really consider which shapes I want to go with, which materials I want to select, what's the building form. You can reallocate that time, or you can just have a better profit, right? So that's one bit of information, is simply just removing the effort, right? The sort of required standard of care that you have to have. That's like, you have to have it. It has to be there to be able to get approval from the city, right? The other one I want to think about is quality check, quality assurance. When should data be entered and it's empty? We all love filling out forms, right? It's like, I just do that for breakfast. I like filling out forms for lunch. That's just all I do in my spare time. Just kidding. But if you think about Revit, it can be like a database or like an endless form filling it out, and that's really annoying. So again, which data, which properties, which pieces of the family components need to be filled out so that you have a complete and correct model that reflects itself in your drawing set. What I think is really interesting is, when should there be data and there's not? And I think usually people can spot something that's wrong. They say, oh, I see that and it's wrong. But when something is absent, when something simply isn't there and it should be, then it's like a harder exercise for people to spot sometimes, unless they've got a trained eye. And so I think that's where some of these tools we can build will sort of be able to check a gap analysis and help assist the quality checks that we need to run our models through. And then, right, if we can start to get to a place where we're meeting our drawings, we're able to submit to the city, get permits, building permits, our contractors can price and, they can construct off of our plans. Then we could say, okay, we've got this model from which we've extracted our drawings. How can we issue the model and certify that model as a deliverable that can be useful beyond the life of just the architectural scope of services, right? This would be an ad service. However, it could have benefit to the contractor and to the ultimately the owner long term. And I feel like there is a more streamlined or a smoother path from my experience so far. And again, I'd love to talk about this in future videos, but there's a smoother path from the architectural model to an owner operational model. Like, again, a digital 3D model that's embedded with data. There's a smoother path to that than going through an as-built model, which is all the, level of development 500, depth, now down to the bolts and screws and things that need to go into an as-built model, so that is basically matching what is being constructed out there in the field, and having that so kind of bypassing that extra detail and having, again, a simplified version that's sort of configured to connect in with the building management systems. So when, again, your facilities management folks are at their desk, they've got their command center of sorts, they're able to manage their inventory, manage all the different systems, light fixtures, water, sprinkler heads, like you name it, fire alarm panel systems. They're able to tie in their management software into this model. The question is, right now, most of those things are pretty much just plan based. It's like a schematic. It's more of a ceiling plan or a floor plan. But what would happen if you could leverage the three-dimensional model that's simplified, so it's easy to navigate, easy to find exactly what you need, not only locating that so that you save the path of travel, but what if you started to use that same model to map out kind of a Google Maps or an Uber for architecture, or an Uber for your facilities management team, so that they could sort of optimize, okay, I've got these tasks, I've got this series of things I need to do. I need to build my shopping cart of stuff to buy. Now that I've got all that stuff to buy in my hand, it's in my possession, now I need to go get that installed and fixed. How can I efficiently move through the building in such a way that minimizes trips up and down stairs, trips that require a ladder, and trips up and down elevators? And if you start to think that way, now you can basically save the efforts of walking around, and you can sort of more efficiently keep the building maintained and be a lower effort. Now, if you work on that, you could have automated paths of travels, automated scheduling, automated ways of connecting different tools to help reach tough to reach places. Like if you had a light fixture at a really tall ceiling that's 40 feet up because it's a lobby, can you reach it? Or do you need to use something like a drone to go over there and then actually handle removing and reinstalling a light fixture, or maybe cleaning that space where it was hard to reach in the past? I don't know, but there's a safety element there. And I think having that digital map, that digital model, can help create the bounds to basically reduce how much effort autonomous vehicles like drones or remote controlled cars or things like that, any kind of smart gear that has some level of spatial awareness, you can upload or at least have that digital model as a reference. And then that can be, it doesn't have to purely rely on the cameras that are on board, right? And any sensor technology. It can sort of work with sensor technology and the digital model to have a better experience overall. So I think there's a lot of potential there. I went off on a tangent, but basically you can utilize, right, the model, right? And that's data. Ultimately, there's three-dimensional data that looks like walls and columns and doors and windows and all the things that we know to be physical and built things. And then there's also the two-dimensional data. That's, I would say, is the properties and the parameters and values that we embed into those 3D elements, right? So it's a bit of an abstract conversation, but I think it's important to sort of see that bigger picture so that you can say, okay, what data do I need to certify? What absolutely has to be there so that I can get my projects built and priced? And I think there's an efficient pathway thing where you basically templatize, commoditize, and you reduce so that you basically have hyper efficiency through a kit of parts, right? It's just a set of typical elements that are propagated throughout the entire facility as much as possible, and that streamlines pricing and procurement and all that good stuff. But I think there's the opposite is also possible. Because we have the ability to open up our models, we can create custom, hyper-custom systems that you would never be able to do with manual tools. Things that you couldn't imagine unless you wrote that with an algorithm, some kind of system to control all of that. So I think there's going to be a continuing people like aiming for the efficiency, but there's also going to be people aiming for hyper custom pieces. And I think the important part is to distinguish when are you exploring the hyper custom and when are you exploring kind of the commodity based architecture. So I think that's important because, again, if you know what data you're targeting and what your algorithm and system, again, going on the custom side, if I go down the custom route, I need to know which information I'm going to start to weave into the recipe of my algorithm. What is going to actually drive what I'm about to create? And I think that one aspect is such a critical differentiator between creative work and big data and big tech, because big data and big tech is more focused on understanding people and understanding systems and trends that are already sort of happening out there. But it's not necessarily like this creative dialogue back and forth where you can literally create the tool that you create your designs from. And so there's like a tighter feedback loop that is potentially available within you as a designer, but also you can open it up and say, I'm going to get a group of people to all weigh in on this system and we can co-create together. So it can be both leveraging a single person, or you can have a whole team of people that are all weighing in. But again, it requires a common language as soon as you try to get a team involved. And what I've seen so far in my career is that it ultimately becomes the lowest common denominator, where, again, whoever's the decision maker or whoever's the lowest common denominator, they will only be okay to allow what they can understand. And I think there is a beautiful unpredictability with what we can create now. And I think there's a concern and a fear that things would get off the rails and it becomes this thing that's completely not buildable. The price is too difficult. But I think that the more we integrate, the more we can integrate with the entire design, build, and own process, the less friction we're going to have. And we're actually going to be able to see more of an explosion of creative new ways of thinking about design, new ways of, like, the results are going to be so incredible because there's like zero friction between people that are all building stuff. So I think that's a huge piece. And again, It's about elevating the conversation. So that's why I'm having these videos. So what I'm getting at, again, I'm kind of like going off on different tangents, but I would say the point is, if you can start to identify which bits of information matter and you start to bring them into your canvas, then you can start to say, okay, what is the relationship of them together? Do I want to create a relationship? Do I want to compare a relationship? Do I want to see how they compete against each other? And when I think about what matters to me, my priorities and our collective priorities for this project, or this climate, or this city, or this culture of people, what matters to them? And I feel like that is the great kind of art of architecture. It's scientific because it's tied to materiality and physics. And on the other side, it's extremely cultural because the only way that architecture comes to life is when people inhabit the buildings, when they bring their zest for life to the table and they become fascinated by the environment they're now in. There's a sense of wonder and there's a sense of hope, and there's these things that happen when we as people come together. And ultimately architecture is facilitating that, but it's creating that platform, it's creating that physical space to actually uphold our cultural norms and our values, right? But it's also a snapshot of where you are at in the world. And I think, the world's going more global, so there's like styles that are being imported, and designers are bringing their thoughts from anywhere around the world, and so I think, how do you stay unique with all that? So that's maybe another conversation, but I just want to kind of get that out there. There's going to be a lot more to unpack with this, and I think it'd be better as a conversation with like 3-4 people. But I think it's very important to say, what is the driver of my design? And in the past, it doesn't have to purely be intuition. It doesn't have to purely be the cost. It doesn't have to purely be the space that you have on the site. Although all those things are a factor, I think you can open up other data points that could be informing the design solution, such as, hey, it's really hot at this time of day, or it's very mild and we have more flexibility with the climate, or hey, we really want to imagine how we're mixing different cultures together in a way that, yeah, maybe it's a bit of social engineering, or maybe it's a bit of setting up the environment for serendipity, for surprises, for opportunities to bump into each other in a way that catalyzes, just exchanging of ideas and exchanging of perspectives and appreciating where you're coming at in the world. So I think there's like a societal piece where, again, I can't speak for the people who would walk through there, but ideally we start to fall in love with sharing. We celebrate who people are and what they bring from their unique perspective. And we get curious about learning from them and seeing them and just finding our common ground, but also finding what makes us unique. So I think, there's so many facets to what architecture does and brings to the world. And I think, it's simultaneously going, what is the ideals that we uphold? What are the principles that we find common ground at? What is the future that we hope to live in? And then saying, okay, that's the abstract big idea, maybe. And then how does that connect to the meta level, the sort of depth, the detail that composes the fabric of life? And is there something that we missed along the way that we should bring back to get to the ideal, right? So I think we're going deeper, but we're also going higher, right? It's a stretching in both layers and both levels. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts. This went a lot longer than I expected. Guess there was a lot on my mind, but I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this big, juicy topic that has so many facets of data in architecture. What is the first thing that comes to mind? Do you fall asleep? Do your eyes roll to the back of your head? Or do you say, you know what? I'm really curious about exploring this relationship between these three things. Is there a relationship there or not? Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I would love to continue the conversation down there, and would love to hear topics that maybe you want to kind of come at it from a different aspect and ask me a question. I'd love to do another conversation starter like this. Let me know if you think this is a good format or not. I'm testing this out, doing a bit of experimentation. So let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for your curiosity and engagement, my friend. Appreciate your attention. Appreciate you. If you find this content useful, hit the like button and subscribe. That definitely helps the channel grow and get it out to other people in the world just like you who are curious and in architecture. And if you have friends, would love to share that with them. And if you are curious to get more resources, I highly encourage you to check out sevenfold.io. That is the hub for all things Sevenfold. And in there, you'll find the Sevenfold Academy, which has our course offerings, as well as blog articles and other things that will be made available there. And as always, if you want access to any of the resource files or cheat sheets or other things like that, you can find those right over there at the Sevenfold shop. And you can get access to all of our content there. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, my friend. Appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good one.